The roar outside is almost unbearable. 80,000 supporters pound against the rhythm of the stadium, chants echo through the concrete corridors, and television cameras wait impatiently in the tunnel, ready to capture the moment history begins. Commentators rehearse their opening lines, photographers adjust their lenses, and millions of people around the world stare at glowing screens, convinced the most important story of the night is about to unfold on the pitch. But behind one heavy wooden door, hidden from every camera and every microphone, another story is already being written. A story that no television broadcast will ever show. The locker room is strangely quiet. Jerseys hang neatly along the walls, boots rest on the floor, and the smell of freshly cut grass drifts in through the open doorway leading toward the tunnel. No one is speaking. Some players stare at the floor, others tighten the tape around their wrists, while a few close their eyes, trying to slow their breathing before the biggest match of their lives. Outside, thousands believe the game has not yet begun. Inside this room, it has already started. The coach stands at the front without saying a word. His tactical board remains untouched, the magnets still arranged exactly as they were an hour earlier. There are no final instructions, no motivational speeches, and no complicated diagrams explaining how to stop the opponent. Everything that needed to be learned has already been practiced over countless training sessions. Tonight, tactics are no longer the greatest challenge. Something far more difficult waits inside every player. Fear, doubt, pressure. The invisible opponents that have destroyed even the greatest teams long before the first whistle. Then the captain slowly rises from his seat. He does not raise his voice. He does not deliver a dramatic speech worthy of a Hollywood film. Instead, he walks toward the center of the room and quietly places his hand on the club crest stitched across his chest. One by one, every teammate stands beside him until 11 players form a perfect circle. No reporters witness the moment. No cameras record it. Years later, every supporter will remember the goals, the tackles, and the celebrations, yet almost nobody will ever know what happened during these few silent minutes before kickoff. The captain finally speaks, but his words are surprisingly simple. He reminds everyone that football history rarely belongs to the most talented team. It belongs to the team willing to sacrifice the most for one another. Statistics will never remember who ran the extra 10 meters to cover a teammate, who chose to pass instead of chasing personal glory, or who quietly accepted a smaller role so someone else could shine. Yet championships are built from exactly those invisible moments. Looking around the room, he asks for something that cannot be measured on any tactical board. Total trust. For several seconds, nobody answers, not because they disagree, but because each player understands the weight of what is being asked. Total trust means more than believing in the system. It means believing in the man standing beside you, even after he makes a mistake. It means running when your legs feel empty because you know someone else would do exactly the same for you. It means accepting that personal recognition may disappear completely if the team succeeds. In football, those promises sound simple. Living by them is something entirely different. One after another, the players nod. No contracts are signed. No official statement is written. Nothing is recorded except inside the memories of those standing in that circle. Yet everyone present understands they have just crossed an invisible line. From this moment forward, no individual exists above the team. Every sprint belongs to all 11 players. Every mistake belongs to all 11 players. Every victory, if it comes, will belong to all 11 players. It is less a secret agreement than a shared commitment, one that no opponent can see and no statistic can measure. Moments later, the tunnel doors open. The deafening sound of the crowd rushes inside like a tidal wave. The players begin walking toward the pitch. To the outside world, they look exactly the same as they did 20 minutes earlier. The same jerseys, the same faces, the same formation printed on the television graphics. But something invisible has changed. They no longer walk as 11 individuals preparing for the biggest match of their careers. They move as one unit, carrying a responsibility that reaches far beyond themselves. As the match unfolds, something unusual begins happening. Whenever one player loses possession, another appears almost instantly to recover the ball. When a defender is beaten, a midfielder is already sprinting back to protect him. A striker who normally celebrates every goal instead points immediately toward the teammate who created the chance. Every camera captures the football itself, but almost nobody notices the hundreds of tiny decisions unfolding between the highlights, the silent sacrifices that slowly begin changing the rhythm of the entire match. Commentators search for explanations. They praise tactical discipline, outstanding coaching, and brilliant individual performances. Analysts spend hours drawing arrows across digital screens, convinced the victory can be explained through formations and statistics alone. Supporters argue endlessly about which player deserved the most credit. They all see the result. Very few ever think about the promise made behind a closed locker room door. And if that quiet agreement truly became the invisible foundation of one unforgettable victory, it would raise an even bigger question. What, exactly, had those players promised each other? And why did none of them ever fully reveal it? The fascinating part is that almost every legendary team in football history has shared stories like this. Not identical words, not identical rituals, and certainly not identical locker rooms, but remarkably similar moments where a group of players quietly decided they would become something larger than a collection of talented individuals. Those moments rarely appear in documentaries because they happen behind closed doors, long before trophies are lifted and history books are written. Yet, when former players speak years after retirement, many eventually admit that the biggest turning point was never a tactical innovation or a spectacular training session. It was the moment everyone inside the room stopped thinking like professionals protecting their own careers and started thinking like one family chasing the same dream. Sports psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades, and the conclusion continues to surprise people. Elite athletes rarely fail because they lack technical ability. At the highest level, every player can pass, shoot, and defend. What separates champions from everyone else is often something impossible to measure with statistics. Shared belief, collective trust, emotional commitment. When individuals become completely convinced that everyone around them will sacrifice just as much as they will, hesitation disappears. Players take risks because they know someone will cover for them. Defenders attack the ball more aggressively because they trust their teammates to fill the empty space. Midfielders attempt impossible passes because they know every runner will fight until the final second. Confidence stops belonging to individuals. It becomes a property of the entire team. Imagine standing inside that locker room just minutes before the biggest match of your life. Around you sit footballers who have spent years competing against one another for places, contracts, and recognition. Some have already won major trophies, others are playing the most important game of their careers. Yet, in that moment, every personal story suddenly becomes irrelevant. Nobody cares who scores the winning goal. Nobody discusses future transfers or individual awards. For perhaps the only time all season, 23 different careers merge into one shared mission. That transformation cannot be forced by coaches, bought by wealthy clubs, or written inside tactical manuals. It only happens when players willingly choose the team over themselves. Many of football's greatest dynasties developed traditions that outsiders never fully understood. Some teams always entered the pitch holding hands across each other's shoulders. Others repeated the same quiet ritual before every final. Some captains demanded that every player speak before important matches, ensuring even the youngest squad member accepted responsibility instead of hiding behind experienced teammates. None of those traditions possessed magical powers, yet together they created something remarkably powerful. They reminded everyone inside the room that they belonged to something larger than individual talent. Rituals do not win football matches, but they strengthen the relationships that often do. This is why truly great captains are remembered long after their playing careers end. Their greatest contribution rarely appears on highlight reels because leadership inside a locker room usually takes place in complete silence. Sometimes it is a conversation with a nervous teenager making his international debut. Sometimes it is preventing frustration from dividing the squad after a difficult defeat. Sometimes it is convincing frustrated substitutes that their moment will eventually come if the team succeeds first. Leadership is not measured by how loudly someone speaks before kickoff. It is measured by how many people willingly follow when everything begins falling apart. History offers countless examples of teams with extraordinary talent collapsing under pressure because invisible cracks had already formed inside the locker room. From the outside, they appeared united, smiling during training sessions and celebrating victories together. Yet privately, small divisions slowly became impossible to ignore. Personal rivalries, competing egos, and hidden frustrations eventually reached the pitch, where tiny moments of hesitation replaced instinctive teamwork. Football is often described as a game of inches, but at the highest level, it is equally a game of relationships. 1 second of mistrust, one argument left unresolved, or one player placing personal recognition above collective success can quietly unravel months of preparation. The opposite is equally true. Teams without the world's biggest stars have repeatedly shocked football simply because every individual completely trusted the others. Supporters often describe those squads as playing with extraordinary heart, yet beneath that emotional description lies something much more practical. They had eliminated hesitation. Every player understood exactly what teammates expected from him, making difficult decisions feel automatic even under enormous pressure. The famous chemistry fans talk about is rarely mysterious. It is usually the visible result of invisible promises consistently honoured over time. Perhaps that explains why so many unforgettable football photographs are taken after the final whistle rather than during the match itself. Cameras capture exhausted players embracing one another, collapsing together onto the grass, or lifting trophies as one inseparable group. Those celebrations are emotional because they represent far more than 90 minutes of football. They symbolise every sacrifice that remained invisible to the outside world. The injuries hidden from headlines, the arguments resolved privately, the personal ambitions temporarily set aside so the collective dream could survive. By then, the pact no longer needs to be spoken aloud because everyone can see its results. Years later, journalists often ask former players the same question. What changed that season? The answers are rarely specific. They smile, exchange knowing glances, and mention that something simply felt different inside the dressing room. They speak about trust, unity, and an atmosphere difficult to explain to anyone who was not there. They rarely reveal exact conversations because the details almost no longer matter. The words themselves were never the true secret. The willingness to live by them was. And perhaps that is why the greatest promise made inside that locker room was never written on paper. It didn't need to be, because every player carried it onto the pitch. The longer you study football, the more one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Tactical systems evolve, formations disappear, sports science transforms the way athletes train, and every generation introduces new ideas that promise to change the game forever. Yet beneath all those visible changes, one element has remained remarkably constant across every era of football history. The greatest teams almost always develop an invisible bond that cannot be explained through statistics or tactical diagrams alone. It is built inside dressing rooms, during exhausting training camps, after painful defeats, and through countless conversations that never appear in documentaries. By the time supporters finally witness greatness on the pitch, the foundation was already built long before the stadium lights ever turned on. Modern football often convinces us that success is created by extraordinary individuals. Headlines celebrate goal scorers, transfer records dominate conversations, and social media transforms elite players into global celebrities followed by millions. Yet when former champions look back on the greatest moments of their careers, they rarely begin by talking about themselves. They remember the teammate who quietly played through pain without telling anyone. They remember the substitute who accepted a smaller role without complaining because the team needed stability. They remember the captain who refused to let frustration divide the dressing room after a crushing defeat. Those moments never become viral clips, but they often determine whether a talented squad becomes a champion or simply another forgotten contender. Sports psychologists describe this phenomenon as collective identity, the moment when individual ambition becomes secondary to the shared purpose of the group. Research has repeatedly shown that teams built on mutual trust communicate more effectively under pressure, recover faster after setbacks, and make quicker decisions in chaotic situations because uncertainty has already been replaced by confidence in one another. Football may appear to be decided by goals, but goals are often the final consequence of something much deeper. Before a striker scores, someone must believe he will make the run. Before a defender commits to an aggressive challenge, he must trust a teammate to cover the empty space behind him. Every spectacular moment begins with an invisible act of belief. This is precisely why the world's greatest coaches spend so much time protecting the atmosphere inside the locker room. They know tactical brilliance becomes almost useless if trust begins disappearing between players. A divided dressing room eventually reveals itself on the pitch through hesitant passing, frustrated body language, and small mistakes that seem impossible to explain. Meanwhile, united teams often survive matches where they are technically inferior simply because every player instinctively fights for the man beside him. Supporters describe those performances as courage or passion, but beneath those emotional words lies something much more practical. Complete commitment to a promise shared by everyone wearing the same jersey. Perhaps that is the real reason locker rooms have always fascinated football supporters. They are the only places where the public is never fully allowed to enter, where the cameras stop recording, and where football briefly becomes something deeply personal rather than public entertainment. Inside those four walls, reputations disappear. Superstars become teammates, young academy graduates speak beside World Cup winners, and every player, regardless of fame or salary, prepares for exactly the same 90 minutes. The world sees the performance. The locker room sees the people behind it. And maybe that is why the greatest secrets in football are rarely secrets at all. They are promises. Promises to run one more time when exhaustion says stop. Promises to protect a teammate after a mistake instead of blaming him. Promises to celebrate another player's success as if it were your own. Promises to place the crest above the name on the back of the shirt. Those promises are never signed. They are never announced. They are never confirmed during post-match interviews. Yet season after season, generation after generation, they quietly shape the destiny of the greatest teams the game has ever known. History remembers the trophies displayed inside museums. It remembers the unforgettable goals replayed for decades. It remembers the captains lifting silver into the night sky while millions celebrate around the world. But sometimes, the moment that changes history doesn't happen in front of 80,000 people. It happens in complete silence, behind a closed locker room door, long before the referee blows the first whistle.